Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the C word, which is the four-letter word that means vagina. This is the third video I've made about that, so I'm starting to sound a bit obsessed, but it's just an interesting topic, I think, because it relates to some other stuff, apparently a long way, which I'll try to link up to, but I might not be able to get there in this video. But I'm still trying to work my way through ideas to do with why the word cunt is a swear word, why it's a taboo word, and I'm reading a few of the theories of how that's come to be the case. And in the last video I made, I was talking about it in relation to what Steven Pinker calls effluvia, which is that all the orifices of the body, but the vagina in this case, and the menstrual blood that flows out of the vagina, in historical time has been a vector for disease, and so it starts to pick up on some of the disease taboos, that are found in pretty much all societies really, and have been historically. I think one interesting slant on that is the video which initially prompted this series, or one of the videos which prompted this series, which is Lacey Green's video, the C word. There was a comment made of it beneath it, in which someone had assumed that the C word meant cancer rather than cunt, because we have the same kind of well, not the same kind, but we have a parallel set of taboos around disease, in this case cancer, that we do to cunts and vaginas and orifices more generally, and the kind of vectors of disease that orifices and the oozings that flow from those orifices tend to offer. I don't really want to pursue that bit of it, although I think it is, according to the reading I've been doing at least, that's one of the suggested origins for the taboos associated with orifices and vaginas specifically. But the other one is to do with a more general taboo around sexuality and sexual behaviour. And it's a taboo which isn't really about repulsion, which the disease one clearly is. It isn't about avoidance. It's more about vigilance. We have a set of taboos around things that we should be vigilant about. These are the things we should pay special attention to, because they are, they may be important for very good reasons, but they also hold potential dangers. We should keep our wits about us when we're thinking and talking and dealing with some concerns, and sex and sexuality is one of those concerns. It isn't that sex is dirty, other than in this disease we have just mentioned, or bad, evil inherently, at least in the way I'm talking about it right now. It's just an activity which carries with it lots of significance. If I can just cite Steven Pinker again, he says that it's a high stakes activity, is what he calls it, high stakes. And here I'm talking about mature sexual behaviour. I'm not talking about the kind of fumblings of adolescence and teenagehood, which can be very kind of playful, I think, in many ways. Not always, but can be. But I think mature sexuality, you can't really go into that kind of activity without a weather eye on all of the consequences and the trappings of that behaviour. And they're not trivial. They're anything but trivial, and they're not to be taken lightly. They have historical baggage and they have contemporary baggage. If you're involved in a sexual relationship, you are, as well, of course, of opening yourself up to a potential vector for disease. And we can minimise that, but you can never minimise it to zero, so it is a contributor. But even if it wasn't the case, there are all these other minefields that you're walking into. Of course, it's a potential source of enormous pleasure and fulfilment, but we would be naive if we pretended that was all they were. We as a species, as these evolved primates that we are, seem to have a kind of social formation based loosely on pair bonding. We form partnerships, sexual relationships with a single other, largely. And that carries with it enormous burdens of emotion. We call that emotion love, or one of the versions of love. We refer to it as that. So when you're dealing with sexuality, whether you like it or not, you are walking on the same terrain that contains love and everything that goes with that. But we're not just pair bonded. There's a lot of promiscuity amongst humans. It seems to be in our nature and in our morality to avoid, and that of course carries over into sexual activity as well. So sexual activity is full of sexual jealousy and rivalry and fear and concerns about performance and all that kind of activity around it. There's also a kind of weird economy around sexuality. I haven't really got time to get into that one. And then, of course, there's the link between sexual behaviour and children and childbirth. And even if we use contraception, even if we have no intention of having children, even if it's sterile, whatever it may be, it's you can't really escape it. You can't pretend that that children aren't connected to the sexual act in some way. And that runs very, very deep, I think, within our psyches. And again, that's not something you can be trivial about. The warning flags should be up, all over the sexual act, for good reasons about protecting the future, about what you might be bringing into the world and what kind of responsibilities are attached to bringing a young person into the world. So there's probably others, but even just those few there, there's a lot of the stakes are high, as Pinker says, in relation to sexuality. Not just because of this vector disease thing I mentioned before, but also because of these very, very grounded in evolution ideas, grounded in the social structures in which we operate, grounded in the economic and political systems in which we operate. And in that kind of condition, it's absolutely right that we should pay special attention and be increasingly vigilant around sexuality and sexual behaviour and the instruments of sexuality and sexual behaviour. We should be very, very careful about how we deal with those objects, the objects of penises and vaginas, and about how we use terminology around these things, and how we use these terminologies and use these objects and instruments as metaphors, and how we circulate these symbols within our society. We should be careful about that, because of or we shouldn't be surprised if we do find ourselves being careful, because, as I say, the stakes are high. So when we use words like the C word, it's right that we should be careful, and it's right that it should have taboos attached to it. Not just taboos of negativity, but just taboos of care, and taboos of significance, and taboos of meaningfulness. I think that's as far as I can get on that one.